After her encounter with the Puca, Feyre begins to accept her new life in Prythian and the High Fae with whom she keeps company. As she strives to create the semblance of a new life, can Feyre truly leave her old self behind?
The views expressed by the hosts are entirely their own and in no way represent the thoughts or intentions of the original author. This podcast is a discussion shared to spark thought and conversation on the characters and themes of this novel.
Though the hosts speak mostly within the constraints of this book, series spoilers may be discussed with or without warning. Explicit language, as well as themes of sex, violence, abuse, and depression will recur throughout this podcast. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome back to Book Talk for BookTok, a podcast where we deep dive into the writing of your favorite novels.
This season, we are exploring Sarah J. Maas's most controversial novel in the Court of Thorns and Roses series.
This is Jack.
And I'm Amy. This week, we're discussing chapters 11 through 14 of A Court of Thorns and Roses.
On this week's episode, we ask, is this the beginning of Feyre and Tamlin's love story? And a theme we're going to be looking into is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and you'll be able to pick that up as we lay it down. So if you remember last time, it ended with Feyre looking out of the window and she sees her father.
Dun dun dun.
Dun dun. It is not her father, everybody. It is the Puca, as we all know. The Puca is this monster thing that's out in Prythian. But what we can see here is Feyre's excitement for her father. Feyre's so excited to see her father that she even starts projecting him to be the planner like she is. Although, let's be real here, her father has not planned a single thing in their entire life. He is not exactly what she wants him to be. So she's so desperate to believe that someone would come for her, that she's willing to ignore the obvious. This is really important because it's an obvious moment of actually when I first read it, I was excited thinking that it was her father.
I think on a first read, I think everyone hopes that it's the father.
Yeah, it was just like, oh my God, he's there. I mean, it plays into the whole Beauty and the Beast trope, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
This is important because it shows that Feyre is willing to believe that the people who care for her care more than that they do. And we really see that later on with Tamlin and how he interacts with her under the mountain. And it's foreshadowing, but also speaks on her character. Feyre, your daddy issues are coming through.
It's a lot more than daddy issues. I think it's this idea of her desires being used against her, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what the Puca is, specifically.
Exactly. So as Tamlin explains to her, the Puca uses your desires against you to lure you and then to eat you. And Feyre thinks of Tamlin, what would have tormented and then eaten me? Who are you to be so powerful that they pose no threat to you? Which I find really interesting because on one hand, it's establishing Tamlin as being perceived as powerful because maybe he doesn't have desires, but also because he's just a big, strong, burly man.
He's a big, strong, burly man who doesn't have any desires, which is obviously what we know about Tamlin is he doesn't have a single desire in the world. False. But it's just interesting that that's how she views him because as the story progresses and he desires her, it adds more value in her mind.
Because he values her?
Yeah, he's a desire. Right now, if she's establishing him as someone who he's so powerful because who is he to defeat this? Well, in order, if it uses your desires against you and this is a big burly man who doesn't have a desire, oh, he's so strong. But then later on, he desires her. Mm-hmm. It adds an extra layer of hubba for her.
Oh, it's her Viagra.
Oh, well, there's a lot of Viagra in this.
There's a lot of Viagra in this episode.
This is the Viagra episode.
You know what is also Feyre's Viagra is food.
I can relate.
Me too. Basic necessities. One of the things that the Puca shows Feyre as she's rushing towards who she thinks is her father, she sees a large pack laden with supplies. What's so sad is that she still fears being without simple necessities like provisions.
So
which,
sad.
To me, signals she's not at her fullest power. She's still weak and scared.
It also shows that she can't dream big. It's literally just a pack. of provisions. It's not like her dad showed up with like a horse and carriage to get her out.
Right. It was just, it's
She
food.
just,
I
all
have
she
food.
wants is her daddy with a little bit of food.
Which I think drives home how devastating it is when Tamlin admits to providing for her family in a way that she's never been able to. Even though it's absolved her of her promise to her mother on one hand, it also demonstrates Tamlin's power over her, that he's provided so much for them and she still desires a bag of food.
It's heartbreaking. That is such a big part of her story, is this promise that they have. And it really leads into the argument that they have there is what gets her to open up. So Tamlin is angry at Feyre, and for the first time, like, we see her opening up. And the way that they handle this initial argument is interesting to see the difference between the two. Tamlin is struggling, like he's clenching his fist, he's trying to hold back, he's trying to restrain himself, which is like pathetic because, you know, he could kill her in an instant and he's just like trying so hard not to punch something. And eventually Feyre opens up and she talks about the promise that her mother made, and that makes Tamlin soften up to her, and he opens up a little bit more to her, and he just is like, wow, okay, like maybe she's not someone worth punching. It's important to note that the reason that Tamlin opens up is because her promise to her mother is like his promise to his duty, to his father. Had Feyre opened up about something that he can't relate to, would he have even softened up like that?
No, probably not.
No, I mean, it's like at the end of the day, he is a narcissist to some degree, and falling for her is seeing himself in her. And that's when Tamlin opens up to her saying that, yes, look, I've taken care of your family. They're fine. And it's a moment that should be her salvation, but it's also her demise in many ways. She talks about saying, like, this is my dream, no one else's. Without the weight of that promise, I was left hollow and empty. And that is so sad. All she has left is that promise.
And it's taken from her. And it's like, yes, the old Feyre is poor and pitiful and needs to die, and the new Feyre needs to be given birth to, but at the same time, that wasn't Tamlin's to do.
No, because this was, I mean, her mother died when she was 8, left that promise. Then they became poor, and then she saw her dad get the ever-living crap beat out of him. Like, this was also her coping mechanism. This was her trauma that she had to deal with, and that was her processing the promise that she made, fulfilling that promise, and holding on to it. It was her way of coping with all of that, and him helping isn't helping.
No, it's detrimental to her true progression.
Oh, completely. So although she's free from this vow, she's honestly never been more trapped. On the flip side, this is when Tamlin starts to open up about his warrior training. So he talks about how he was trained as a warrior as a child, and he went to the war camps with his father. And once again, he was trained to be a warrior. He didn't actually fight. Just how Tamlin has these like swords and knives or baldric, and he doesn't have anyone to fight. Like, he is a warrior without a warrior. And I know the community is an anti-Tamlin community. I am anti-Tamlin, but he is a very tragic character because once again, he never fills the mark. So Tamlin is surrounded by his father, by friends who expect him to be something he can't be. And at a certain point, even Feyre expects him to be something he can't be for her.
Yeah, what did I say while we were prepping? The scales of judgment have found him wanting. He's got really big shoes to fill, and he can't fill them.
He can't.
He's got toddler feet.
He's got little tiny toddler feet, and like no one's at, like, you know, Tamlin doesn't know who Tamlin is because he's too busy failing everyone else. And no one likes Tamlin, but it's sad. As sad and pathetic as he is still a narcissist, moody asshole. And we start to hear more about Tamlin's moods. Lucien is the one who tells us about Tamlin's mood, how he gets, you know, very quiet and broody. And Lucien even talks about how in order to stay in power, Tamlin's got to be more, he's got to show off that power. He's got to be the one in charge. So when Tamlin's in a mood, he's a dick. Like, Lucien says he shreds people, right? Obviously not literally, at least I hope not. But it's like for Tamlin, his moods equal brutality, and brutality equals power. And this is the only way Tamlin knows on how to keep power. So he's got to stay moody because that's what's been helping him.
I feel like Tamlin needs to go to like an Emos Anonymous.
He needs to go to such therapy. It's insane.
I guess that's what therapy is, Emos Anonymous.
It really is. I mean, wait, side note, we both go to therapy.
Yes, we do. We do.
We are
I am
emos.
an emo.
We are recovering emos.
I go to therapy.
Yeah.
No shame there. So going back to this idea of Feyre's death and rebirth and how this is being forced upon her by Tamlin. On one hand, you can kind of view this as a good thing because it's unlocking new opportunities for Feyre and it's opening her mind to who she will transform into, who she needs to transform into. But despite all that, she retains her hunter and survival instincts. And I think that's really important to note now, that even though she's being given permission despite the promise being absolved, that she still holds on to those instincts. However, she relinquishes the act of hunting to Tamlin.
She's starting to give him control.
Yes, she's starting to give him control. And we see this later on in chapter 11 as she's riding around with Lucien. She being Feyre, says, "I never filed a single arrow during those 3 days we rode along the border. That very morning, I'd spied a red doe in a glen and aimed out of instinct, my arrow poised to fly right into her eye. I'd stared at her, fat and healthy and content, and then slackened the bow, replaced the arrow in my quiver, and let the doe wander on." So I want to remind, gentle listener, when's the last time we saw a doe?
Earlier on when she killed it.
Earlier on when she killed it in chapter 1. And I would like to suggest that the doe represents Feyre. In the first chapter, she had to kill the doe or her true self to feed her family. Now, there's no need. And so she lets the doe wander on, fat, content, and happy.
I know that we're spoiling a little bit further on, but you made a really good point to me that later on in the book.
Later on, Feyre identifies herself as a doe as she goes to meet Amarantha.
Beautiful. Brilliant.
Beautiful.
Love it. I love it.
That's called good writing, folks.
Also great that she compares herself to a doe and not a wolf or not a bear. You know what I mean? Like she's comparing herself to an animal that is inherently defenseless.
Right. Defenseless, prey to other animals.
Yeah, but also beautiful too. It's always an exciting thing when you see like a doe or something because they're also very skittish.
Yes. Which Feyre is.
Which Feyre is. Even though she's starting to see herself as this doe, right? This fat and healthy doe that she's able to like let go and live, it's not without her struggle. She is still struggling, trying to embrace this feminine side, this self-comfort by like when she looks at the paintings and allowing herself to look at those paintings. And she still hears Nesta's voice inside of her calling her ignorant, assuming that Faye and Nesta alike, are going to shame her for admiring such things. So the doe gets to go be fat and healthy. Feyre's still working on this part.
Yeah, and you know what's sad is that she continues to compare herself and her art from the cottage to the art that she's seeing in Tamlin's manor.
Yes.
And Feyre reminds herself of the art in the cottage on page 98 and thinks, "Those chipped, miscolored paintings inside the cottage flashed in my vision. Perhaps they would forget who had even painted them in the first place. Insignificant. That's what all those years I'd given them would be, as insignificant as I was to these high fae."
It's so sad.
It's so sad. So we're looking in chapter 11 right now. If you skip ahead to chapter 12, the same theme comes up. She won't even allow herself to look at the art in Tamlin's manor when there are fae servants around because she's so ashamed of expressing interest. I mean, in her mind, she's unworthy to express that interest because she is insignificant and she is human.
I don't know if she wants to progress or wants to find herself at this point. It's kind of happening without her even willing to, but she's still fighting this old instinct, this old Feyre. And, you know, I just want to have a quote here. "If I were to remain here, it was essential to know the best hiding places, the easiest way out, should things ever go badly for me. I couldn't entirely ignore the instinct." So at this point, she's actually making a map of like where to leave if she needs to get out. This instinct is still alive in her, and this map is her holding on to that.
You know what's so sad is that instead of using pen and paper to draw and create like she wants to, she's using it to survive.
No.
She's using it.
That's so sad. She still can't even enjoy.
She can't even enjoy simple things.
Which she could be, and that's what's extra sad is that she could actually probably draw something nice.
Right.
Instead, I wonder if her map was like really pretty.
I mean, I feel like it was just, I forget what the description is, but like
X's and O's and circles. Yeah.
Right. It wasn't supposed to be able to be discerned by others.
Yeah.
It was just for herself. Kind of sticking with the survival instinct theme, what I find interesting when she talks about her hunting skills and how she acquired them. You know, for us, or at least for me, I feel like Feyre should be admired for being self-taught, that through trial and error, she was able to become such a good huntress.
Yeah,
or hunter.
fantastic. I respect that. Like, I don't even know if I taught myself anything.
Yeah, I definitely didn't. So.
Oh, no, yeah, I was about to say, I crocheted during the pandemic. No, I had YouTube teach me.
However, she can also still continue to be viewed as inferior for being self-taught and learning through trial and error, because if she were rich or if she were high fae, someone else would have trained her.
Is it a compliment or is he holding it over her? A little bit of both.
Yeah, we're gonna dive into that.
Oh, we're not there yet?
We're not there
Okay,
yet.
sorry.
So yeah, is this Tamlin? This might be Tamlin. I don't remember off the top of my head. On page 110, asks, did you learn to hunt in a similar manner, trial and error? Feyre responds, I spied on hunters when I could get away with it, and then practiced until I hit something. When I missed, we didn't eat. So learning how to aim was the first thing I figured out. I don't think he really remarks on that. And
No.
I don't know that it's given the respect it deserves either.
No, I mean, Tamlin's definitely collecting information and hiding it away, right? He's learning a lot about Feyre right now, way more than he did in these earlier chapters. And he's just definitely being quiet, listening. And that's very Tamlin of him. Doesn't mean it's a good thing. He's not like giving it like you said, the respect of the damn. That was good for you. You learned how to hunt.
You know what's interesting now that you're saying this? I feel like the way he's learning about Feyre, he's trying to model for Feyre how she should be learning about him, but without saying anything.
Expand on that, please.
So I know because of our notes that you're going to begin to talk about how Lucien and Tamlin drop clues for Feyre. And
yes.
He is learning about Feyre through the clues she's giving him. And he's modeling for her listening and archiving information without actually asking questions or providing more information on that, right? He just takes what he's given and paints a picture of her in his own head.
Yeah, maybe not the most accurate picture, but he's painting one.
Right. And I feel like in some way he's modeling to her without letting her know, like, hey, I'm doing something. You should do this too. Modeling for her what she needs to do in order to fight this curse.
That's amazing. I mean, like, that really goes back to what Alice said in the episode before of like saying, hey, keep your senses about you. And that's, you're right. Like, he's showing her, he's keeping his senses, his wit about him. Oh, good point out. Good point out.
Thank you.
Like you said, yes, I am going to touch on Lucien and Tamlin are really leaving these breadcrumbs for her. They're trying to get her to listen. And she's listening. It's kind of great. This is one of those things that later on in the book, when I read it the first time, and I was like, oh my God, he has a heart of stone. I was like, it made sense now. On page 107, the very famous quote, Lucien says, for someone with a heart of stone, yours is certainly soft these days. They're trying to give Feyre a heads up of what's happening. They're not doing a good job of that. There could have been a lot more they let her listen in on. Tamlin could have responded with like, it's such a shame that my heart is made of stone like that, right? Oh my God, that's so weird. If only someone would love me.
No, it's true though, but like, why do they only bring it up twice?
I know.
I mean, they only bring it up once.
Yeah, the adder's the other one.
Yeah, it's the adder who brings it up again. And you'd think for something so important.
Well, I mean, towards the end, like, I get really, and we'll talk about it there, but when Alice tells Feyre about the curse and stuff at the end, I get so mad because Alice is pissy about it. You stupid girl. She calls her stupid a couple times and like as if like, oh, I can't believe Feyre didn't figure it out. With what clues? This is how she's supposed to figure it out, that there's a curse on them?
Yeah, I mean, you said it really well while we were prepping earlier. Tamlin and Lucien are trying to give Feyre the tools that she's going to need, but they're not setting her up for success.
No. But, in this conversation that Lucien has with Tamlin here, he talks about being so worried to being like a bad ruler like his father. He definitely has his own set of daddy issues. He doesn't want to be like his father. His father was someone who was cruel and let humans suffer. His dad had slaves too, human slaves. So he doesn't want to be like him. when Lucian's like, hey man, this blight, this thing is going to win, we should probably do something about it, Shalalala kiss the girl, Tamlin says, the force plaguing our lands and power, that too will pass someday if we're cauldron blessed. He's really nonchalant about it because they're immortal, right? Like they can live for a long ass time and they can have that luxury of saying, damn, Amarantha's been in charge for like 50 years. That sucks. We'll do something about it in like 100 years or so. They'll win. And maybe in 100 years, the High Lords would all get together and kick her out. In the meantime, how many humans will have died? And he does not care. As much as he doesn't want to be his father and he doesn't want to enslave anyone. And that's part of the reason why he doesn't want to go along with this with Feyre, because he's really resistant. Like, I'm not like my father. I don't want to do this to her. This being make her fall in love with him. He doesn't care if humans die in this at all.
No, because he has no concept of what it's like to live for such a short amount of time. His fingernails probably live longer than humans.
Yeah.
He probably clips them less often than
They're
humans.
claws. He just lets them grow.
That's right.
Because after all, he is a beast.
He is a beast.
A beast that Feyre falls for.
She does fall for him. How dare she? So how do we get to this point where Feyre is open to even following? Well, is open even the right word?
She ends up falling for him.
She does fall for him.
And there's a reason.
There is a reason. And let's talk about that reason. So as Lucian wraps up telling Feyre some of the things that Tamlin has been through, Feyre thinks, I thought of what Lucian had told me about his isolation, that burden, thought of what Tamlin had mentioned about how these estates should not have been his, and felt sorry for him. And I think that this is an important passage because we start to see how Feyre is making those connections between her experience and Tamlin's experience. And I think feelings for anybody starts with empathy. Mm-hmm. And what I really, as I was thinking about this, for the first time ever, I was like, oh, Tamlin's the younger child who should not have inherited the burden of High Lord, just like Feyre is the younger sister who should not have had to take care of her entire family's survival.
When you pointed that out to me, it was the most, oh, well, no wonder they fell for each other.
Why is it not like so obvious the first time or even the second time?
I think because like we're all caught up in the whole series as a whole, rather than like these initial moments of, oh, these are two people that actually had interests or similarities enough about them that, yeah, they would fall in love. This is a real thing.
Yeah. And it's not so much about Feyre getting caught up in the moment or being charmed by the immortals. Like she and Tamlin actually did have a connection, even though it's kind of hard to see that when you think about the rest of the series. Mm-hmm. I think what I also observe as I read this book is that we already know Feyre thinks in light and color and smells and texture. And anytime Tamlin is in her presence, he brings about a heightened sense of light and color and smell and texture. And I'm just going to run through a couple images that Feyre observes when Tamlin enters a room. A breeze announced his arrival, the heat of his skin like an inferno against my cool fingers. A soft breeze laced with the scent of roses slipped in through the open windows to caress my face. His golden hair caught and held the morning light as if it were spun from the sun itself.
Now, what are we seeing here? What do all these have in common? They're spring-related.
They're spring-related.
Breezes, hot, cold, cool.
Sun, roses. It's very consistent. And it's not just here. It is throughout the book. Anytime, especially as they're falling in love with one another, he's like the breeze that ruffles her hair all the time.
That's just an example of good writing. Great on Sarah J. Maas's part of being consistent and being able to describe him in a way that immerses us and has us understand who he is. He is the spring court High Lord.
Exactly. When Feyre is around Tamlin, her body and her instinct still reacts to him like he's a predator. He often makes her feel trapped and small. And we see this now, and we're going to see this later. She describes him as so big that the space felt cramped like a cage. And his eyes were a brand upon me as I finished cleaning, and the room became too small, too hot.
I don't know. You say prey, I say horny. This is like, there's a difference in this one where rather than feeling like a prey before where her bowels are watery or she gets scared, it's feeling hot in there. Feels a little too small in there.
I think you're right, and I think that's what Sarah J. Maas is trying to accomplish with these
Oh, yeah.
descriptions. But for me, I'm looking at it from a view of there's still this weird power dynamic.
Yes, 100%.
And he still has power over her.
He still takes up too much room. It's yeah, 100%. It's a horny moment, but it's a power dynamic horny moment.
Yes, this is where the feminine and the Marxist meet.
We meet together in this moment. We're really talking about when they're in the infirmary. And this infirmary scene is a really big part because they're just being hot and horny for each other.
They are being hot and horny for each other. And you want to know why? Because there's a threshold. And this is a really important image that we see in the infirmary scene and that we see throughout literature. Doorways and thresholds, and I remember being taught this in like the 6th grade, that crossing a threshold is figurative or representative of crossing a line into a new stage of life or into a new mindset that you can't go back from. And what I love about the infirmary scene where they're together is that Feyre is standing on the threshold and Tamlin she sees him as straddling an inner line within himself. Would you like me to read you the quote?
I want you to read the quote because this is like, I mean, when you pointed the threshold out of everything here, it just made me so excited. I'm like, oh my God, this is actually genuinely the moment things change for them.
I never saw this as their first moment, but I think that this is the beginning of their love story. And this is what the passage says. I paused with my foot on the threshold. That's what happens when you're responsible for lives other than your own, isn't it? You do what you have to do. He was still sitting on the table, still straddling that inner line between the here and now and wherever he had gone to in his mind to endure the fight with the bogey. You aren't what I expected for a human, he said.
You know what I enjoy most about reading this?
Grinds my gears.
Grinds my gears, but in a good way. We're talking about like this is her stepping through the threshold, right? This is like her beginning to fall for Tamlin. But I mean, this is also the beginning of everything. Like this is her falling for Tamlin, which then means she goes to the under the mountain, which then eventually she means becomes Fae, right? And all the tasks that she has to do underneath the mountain. Every task that goes by, she starts to understand it's for more than just Tamlin. It's for her family. It's for the Fae. And this quote here of her entering the threshold into the new stage of her life, right? She's saying that's what happens when you're responsible for lives other than your own, isn't it? She's entering this world, this new threshold where that was true before, and it's going to be so much more true for her later.
She doesn't know that. She thought she got to shed that.
And instead, she's entering it like tenfold.
Yeah, which is so sad.
It's so sad. But even with this one line, like this quote that you're giving here, another moment of like where Marxists and feminists meet. Her saying that this isn't what happens. This is what happens when you're responsible for lives other than your own. This is Viagra to Tamlin. This is the Viagra episode. This is where Tamlin's like, oh yeah, I get it. I understand it. Because he does understand. He is in charge of the Spring Court. Doesn't do a good job, but he is. And his response to that is, you aren't what I expected for a human. And that is the absolute equivalent of, you're not like other girls.
Which is such a cheap move.
I hate the concept of you're not like other girls. Like, I mean, I think we all can universally agree that any guy who says that is a red flag guy, walk away. But unfortunately, this is also something that does do it for Feyre. And I will say, we've all been there, that moment that you feel special and you feel seen and you're like, oh, wow, this person actually sees me. It's also the moment that she starts to differentiate herself from Nesta. Because she's like a human. She's a human. And Feyre's not like what he expected for a human. And she gets to finally move away for that. So Feyre makes a point about doing what needs to be done for her family. And that's what Tamlin connects to. Obviously, that's what I've been saying. But it's interesting because, like I said, he does the same thing for the Spring Court. But does he ever really do a good job about that? Not really. He's in charge of this curse, right? Like the entire nation of Prythian and then the humans that fall in the land underneath that are all dependent on Tamlin, because if Tamlin can break the curse, everyone gets their power back and everyone can just like kill Amarantha, right? Like it all comes down to him. And what does he do with that kind of pressure, with that kind of weight? He shuts down. He does nothing. All he has to do is get this girl to fall in love with him, but he won't even try.
Can't say my comment.
Your eyes are rolling so hard right now. You look so over him.
He's doing the best he knows how.
And really,
which isn't very much.
I would say he's doing what he knows how, and that's shutting down.
Yeah, he knows no better. So therefore, it's his best.
That is true. Accurate. So, in the same moment here, right, he asks a question that, I'm not going to lie, it's a panty dropper. I found him carefully studying me, his lips in a thin line. Has anyone ever taken care of you? He's putting her on a pedestal right now, and while what he's asking, it's true, it hits home for her. And at the same time, in his own mind, he's building her to be something that she's not.
But, Feyre is young and naive, as we all have been, and this is crack. And you know what I imagine when I imagine the scene? I imagine, like, the rich young lord who pulls aside the young handmaid who works in his estate. Yeah. Like, she drops something and her hand is bleeding. And he's like, who takes care of you? Let me take care of you.
This reminds me of, like, every anime, manga, K-drama.
Downton Abbey.
Just Downton Abbey. Just it's a thing that, and I don't want to assign it as a female thing. I think it's a very human thing of wanting to be taken care of. I think women are more comfortable at expressing this idea because it's a gender stereotype that men will take care of women, right? But a lot of times women are the, quote, more nurturing ones who end up taking care of the family. It's a human thing to want to be taken care of, or in this case, a fairy thing.
Well, no, Feyre is human and she wants to be taken care of, whether she is willing to admit it or not. And Tamlin reads that and feeds into it.
I can't blame her on this one. It's like,
no,
get it, girl. Go get taken care of.
You know what? Yeah, go be a kept woman. Go be that trophy wife.
Sign me up. Go. It's okay. No one will judge you.
Go live my dream for me.
Go live my dream. It's no one will judge you, and if they do, they don't understand it. Go be that trophy wife.
Yep.
I support you 100%.
Talking about living that trophy wife life, she now has access to this giant library. To be a proper trophy wife, she has to learn how to read.
And to be a proper Beauty and the Beast trope, there has to be a proper library.
Yeah. What I love about this library is that it really, to me, illustrates the continuing push and pull of staying in and belonging to Prythian that resides in Feyre's heart right now. She sees the library as both luxurious, but also as enemy territory. And this is reinforced by the images she's going to see of Fae and humans in the mural in the library. She describes the tomes as lining each wall like soldiers of a silent army. When she sees the mural, she recognizes that all the world had once been theirs, at least as far as they believed, crafted for them by the bearer of the cauldron. There was no mention of humans, no sign of us here. And when she sees the battles depicted between humans and Fae, she recognizes that humans are weak, and she doesn't need to know that they were slaughtered because she knows they were slaughtered. Like, that's just what it means to be human.
I just love that she's, in this moment, she's like taking it all in, and she's just really okay with human mortality. And I think that she's always understood humans' lifespans are so small and insignificant. And she accepts that. And she accepts that because she accepts that in herself. She sees that she's she's going to die. And later on, when she's under the mountain, it's almost like she's rooting for herself to die. Like, she's so over living when she's underneath the mountain. She's just like, all right, this is it. This is the day I'm gone. I'm fine.
At the end or start of every chapter, when she's under the mountain, she's like, yep, I've accepted I'm going to die.
I'm cool with it. I'm cool. Yeah.
You know what's also interesting is that in this same scene, she equates humans to being pigs. And she thinks, I suppose we'd been as low as pigs to them. Pigs, what do we do with them? We slaughter them. We eat them.
Yep.
You know who also called Feyre a pig? Nesta.
Oh, damn it, Nesta.
Just in case you forgot.
I did.
What I also find interesting about this library scene is that Feyre views the mural as a masterpiece. Yet the High Fae treat it with no reverence whatsoever, which I believe can suggest two things. Either A, Feyre's assessment is off. She is giving reverence to something that isn't that great. Or B, the High Fae take a lot of things for granted and aren't able to see the worth of something, which right now, that's how the Fae view Feyre. That she is insignificant, or at least she assumes they view. I think they view her as insignificant.
In many ways, you can even look at it that she sees herself as this painting, right?
Yeah.
Like she is as insignificant as the Fae view this painting, right? Because she's using the same language that she uses to describe herself.
It's true.
So in some regards, like she is as significant as this painting.
Excellent point.
Thank you.
I really like that.
You know, she definitely does not see herself as this painting. She sees herself as someone who is insignificant, who still struggles and can't even read or write.
It explains why she still is so humiliated when she thinks about asking for help learning reading or writing. And when Tamlin offers to help her, it just completely drives her away.
Yeah. I mean, it really drives her away.
What she says to him exactly, help? You mean a fairy is passing up the opportunity to mock an ignorant mortal? And what does he say? That stays with her forever?
Why should I mock you for a shortcoming that isn't your fault?
But the thing is that even the books are mocking her in their description. First of all, she's reading children's books, and she thinks, I couldn't even read them. I hated the smell of these books, the decaying rot of the pages, the mocking whisper of the paper, the rough skin of the binding. I looked at the piece of paper at all those words I didn't know. And of course, in her mind, he's there to mock her because everything's mocking her right now.
No, Feyre, it's okay. We don't mock you, except for in this moment, I will, because she is normally super comfortable with who she is, right? Like, she's like, accepts that she's going to die. She accepts that she's going to like piss herself. She's cool that she doesn't like it, but she's, she's illiterate. But this is the first time we've actually seen her lash out like that. And it's really the moment where you can tell, like you said, the threshold that she already passed the night before with Tamlin and, wrapping up his hand. He comes in all excited saying like, oh, like, hey man, you wrap my hand. Remember when we were all cozy in there and we were cool? And then she starts like lashing out at him because she's now comfortable a little bit there with him.
Just the night before, he's like, who's helped you? Who's taking care of you? And now he's like, let me help. And she's like, no,
I don't need your help.
I don't need help.
And before she even entertained the idea, right? Before that night of saying, like, trying to get Lucien to help, she even thought about Tamlin and thought, well, he'd laugh at me. And now he is offering, and she can't accept that. Like, things like there's definitely been a shift there. And of course, like, Tamlin has an emotional intellect the size of a pea. And then his response is, you aren't what I had in mind for a human, believe me. It's similar to what he said the night before, right? Of, you're not like what I thought for a human. He really used that phrase or the sentiment the night before as a compliment and something intimate to now lashing out. It's different of being unique to now being difficult. Poor Feyre. And he, what he imagines as humans is like, he's like really driving home. Humans are weak, are simple, they're stupid. My note here is, yeah, Tamlin, that's why you broke the curse. Duh.
You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of a watch my dad got for me when he was visiting Switzerland years ago. And it was so beautiful and wonderful. And then when the battery died, no watchmaker in America would take it from me to replace that watch.
Really?
Or to replace the battery because it was Swiss made.
Oh, wow.
And
Is Feyre Swiss made?
I don't know if she's Swiss made, but it's the same idea, right? Yesterday you were unique and beautiful. Today you're just difficult.
Yep. That's also the beginning of like showing that he is manipulative and emotionally manipulative. I'm going to use a compliment you loved and use it to hurt you. Not that he knew that she loved it, but still. And from this, she starts to hear Nesta's voice again in her head. And she starts to show the regression of herself. And, she's hurt. She was feeling that connection to Tamlin. It's not, made up. She was saying, should have known better than to think that maybe there would be someone, human or fae or whatever, who could understand what my life, what I had to become these past few years. And yet when she needed him to understand why she lashed out, he wasn't there to do that. And that's a lot to ask of someone, saying, hey, like, I'm going to lash out at you and I need you to get it. And that involves a lot of time. So he hasn't necessarily earned that responsibility just yet, but she needed him to understand her emotionally and he didn't do it. Instead, they're both pissed off from this argument. They both are just so frustrated with each other. And it's just really funny that they both go to Lucian.
Because somehow he's the emotionally stable one.
I know, right? So, but they handle it differently. Tamlin goes to Lucian to lash out at him, kind of uses him as a little punching bag. And Feyre goes to him and is like, hey man, I'm going to go hunt now. This transition, I remember reading it and feeling this was a little funny. It's like, what, you were just arguing in the library and now you want to go hunt the cereal. So it could feel weird, except there is a reason.
Except it's a regression. So if we think back to the old Feyre, in this new role, she's been trying to leave the hunting to Tamlin, but because she is regressing, she's going back to the one thing she knows, which is to hunt. Mm-hmm. And she goes off to hunt the cereal. I love that when you say it, it sounds like cereal to me.
Do I say that? Cereal, or do you say cereal?
I say cereal. You say cereal.
I don't even understand what comes out of my mouth sometimes.
Is it a step back? In some ways it is. If we look at the setting, it's very similar to the first chapter of the book, just not in winter. It's in spring. Mm-hmm. But I think also it reminds us of what she's capable of. Like, oh, yeah. In case you forget, this woman can still lay traps and snares.
And hunt this terrifying beast that is older than Prythian itself.
Yeah. And what does the cereal tell us?
In the TikTok fan community, everyone loves the cereal because everyone just is like imagining cereal like with the cup of tea, just watching all the drama go down, giving Feyre just a little bit of information at a time just to watch it all implode. A huge fan of the cereal. The cereal, huge fan of him. So we now get this very famous quote, which I will read for you. Stay with the High Lord, human. That's all you can do. You will be safe. Do not interfere. Do not go looking for answers after today, or you will be devoured by the shadow over Prythian. He will shield you from it, so stay close to him and all will be righted. What the cereal tells Feyre is something that she holds so close to herself. Like, she makes decisions from here on out saying, all right, I got to stay close to Tamlin. He's the High Lord. Like, I mean, this is also where she finds out that he's the High Lord. But she's like, I got to stick with him. He's the one. That's what the cereal said. I've got to stay with the High Lord. Spoiler to future books to come, that is not the High Lord. And this is normally something that we would leave in the breadcrumb area, but it's something that's so important and pivotal to her character development, is her misinterpreting this information that the High Lord that he's recommending to stay with is Tamlin. The cereal did that on purpose because he is a gossiping little
tea-drinking little whore.
I was gonna call him a whore, but yeah, definitely. He's the kind of whore that like you call a whore, but like in a loving way. Like, oh my God, you whore.
That was totally an endearment.
No, I definitely don't think the cereal's out there getting laid every 5 seconds or anything. We're not here to slut shame the cereal. Another big part here is that the description of the term shadow. You'll be devoured by a shadow over Prythian. Who's another High Lord surrounded by shadows? That's Rhysand. That's the High Lord that is talked about that she should actually stay with. And what was it? When we were talking about our notes, I was like, and how do you shield yourself from a shadow? Is with another shadow.
Yeah, well, and I wanted to offer correction that you shield yourself from a shadow. You shield yourself from a shadow with night, because if there is no light, there are no shadows.
Yep. Another thing that the cereal says is that he calls her Tamlin's human or woman. And Feyre says, despite all that it has said, despite its order to stop asking questions and stay with Tamlin, it was his human woman that echoed in my head that made me clench my teeth. My note here is, she likes it. Don't try faking it.
Which I disagree with. I mean, I see your point, but when I think about writing and when I write my own stories, clenched teeth indicate anger.
I find it sexual. I mean, this is the whole Marxist feminist point here, but she's like, she's clenching things, Amy. She's horny for him. She likes it. But ultimately, like, it comes to that, like, wanting to feel a little bit owned in order to be taken care of. In order for someone to take care of you, it's a certain amount of not being owned, but a little bit of being owned.
But like relinquishing some ownership.
You gotta give it a little bit. She's horny for him. It's fine.
So that wraps up the majority of our episode.
There's going to be a lot more to come. I'm excited for future. It's just, I'm going to be using horny a lot more often in future episodes.
And Viagra. Apparently.
And Viagra, because it just gets heated from here on out. But there were a lot of breadcrumbs that Sarah J. Maas left for us here. So I'm going to take you through that. One is literacy, chapter 12. It was the best I can do, and to any literate human, my markings would have made no sense. But I couldn't write or read more than my basic letters. And then again, chapter 12, Tamlin talking to Feyre, you can't write, can you? No wonder you became so adept at other things. Well, what happens later underneath the mountain? They really make a point here of like, she cannot read and write.
Yeah, and I didn't notice it the first time. But
really?
It's everywhere.
Everywhere.
It's everywhere.
They're like, this will come back and haunt her. The curse. It's another breadcrumb. Ironically, Feyre thinks about the blight. Quote, a threat, and perhaps one they truly didn't want me knowing about either, from lack of trust or because I was no one and nothing to them. She'd end up being everything to them.
She thinks they don't trust her, where they're like, hey, he's got a heart of stone.
Yeah. And then even like Tamlin tells Feyre, your affinity for eavesdropping, maybe you'll someday learn something valuable, Feyre.
Like I said, he was trying to model for her. You need to listen.
Feyre. We also get breadcrumbs for future books on chapter 13. At least I learned the layout of the land and I knew to never go north. Haha, sucker. Yes, you would. When Feyre's looking at the painting, she sees that the way that it all started was with the cauldron being held by starry hands, a mighty black cauldron held by glowing, slender female hands in a starry, endless nights. She becomes those female hands in the ending of the series. And then finally, Feyre has a dream. We start to see Rhysand appear in these dreams. Amy, please read it for us.
The quote is, behind me a shadow lurked. No, watched. I didn't dare turn to look at it, to see who might be within that shadow, observing, not as the wolf stared at me across the clearing.
Rhysand is lurking. So those ends the breadcrumbs for this section.
So we started this episode with the question, is this the beginning of Feyre and Tamlin's love story? And as I think you can see from the points we brought up today, we are here to convince you that though I did not think this was the start the first time or second time I read this book, I definitely saw the fight with the Naga, which we'll discuss in the next episode. I thought that was the start of the love story, but I really think that it began early.
Yeah.
And it began with that infirmary scene.
It definitely starts earlier, and it has deeper roots. Their love story has deeper roots than even I gave it credit for the first time I read it. I like how I made it myself dramatic, then I gave it credit. It's deeper roots than my first read.
Yeah, mine too. I definitely wrote them off as a flight of fancy, not as having Jen.
Yeah, like convenient, because at one point she even says, like, I would have loved anything that would have been nice to me. Well, not necessarily, Feyre. Like, you guys had a real connection.
Right. And I think she only starts to fall for him because of that connection.
I'm excited for us to kind of go more into their love story in upcoming chapters. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Book Talk for Book Talk. We encourage you to rate and subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast listening platform. Next week, we'll be exploring chapters 15 through 17 of A Court in Thorns and Roses.
We would love to hear your thoughts based on today's conversation. You can submit your comments to our form at booktalkforbooktalk.com for a chance to have your feedback discussed during a weekly mini episode.
If you are enjoying the podcast, visit our website, booktalkforbooktalk.com, to view our latest merch and to learn about supporting the show through Patreon, Ko-Fi, or Venmo.
Or find us on TikTok and Instagram at the handle BookTalk